Pat, good to see you. Welcome to Autosport International. Happy New Year to you.
And to you.
What have you been up to?
Well, I've had a very pleasant year. I haven't had to work 6 or 7 or 8 days a week. Managed to improve my golf a little bit and doing a bit of consultancy and finding out that journalism isn't quite as easy as I used to think it was.
Of course, yeah. You are Autosport's sister magazine, F1 Racing's technical consultant. Are you enjoying that side of things?
Yeah,
we like reading what you've got to say.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I do regard it as a hobby rather than a business, but I've always enjoyed writing. I like trying to explain technical things to people in simple terms, and yeah, it's a challenge, but I do enjoy it.
It is difficult, isn't it? Certainly when I watch a Grand Prix with a mate who has a passing interest and has to asks me about KERS and adjustable front wings and rear wing stalling and that sort of thing. It's very difficult, isn't it, to sort of get your head around what's perceived as gimmickry.
Yeah, that's right. You know, Formula One needs to have a technical image. I think it's a very important part of the DNA of Formula One. But we mustn't make it too complicated. You know, it's rather like cricket and football, isn't it? Cricket, I think if you're really into the intricacies of it, people tell me it's interesting. I haven't found that myself yet, but people say it is. Football, it's there. You go for it. And I think, you know, that's more the way Formula One should be.
I think we're in the middle of a golden era, aren't we, of Formula One? I think certainly 2010, with 5 guys fighting for the championship until the last round, and so many different variables with the guys who are winning. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, one of the things we've seen really, 2009, 2010 also, is the cars have been very, very close. You know, we haven't had this huge spread. Now, okay, the new guys coming on at the back, they've got a lot to do, but from midfield onwards, the gaps have been remarkably close. That's led to some great racing, and of course, you know, the championship being wide open right to the end there.
There's almost a catch-22 situation to it, isn't there? The regulations these days are very restrictive. There's only so much you can do.
Yeah, that's right, and you know, I will always say they're far too restrictive. Now, unfortunately, of course, with the economic climate, it's been necessary to pull certain things back, and some of it's been quite good. You know, the spend on engines is just, it's a minute fraction of what it used to be, and that hasn't really affected the racing. But I think in other ways it is so restrictive and we don't see the innovation, and it's really great to see people like McLaren coming up with something like the F-duct. I mean, what a lovely bit of innovation. It's really good to see that, but I long for the day when maybe we can have a very stringent budget cap and then open up the rules again and let people use their ingenuity for success. You know, that's what it should be. It's a meritocracy.
Why was the F-duct banned? On the basis that it doesn't actually cost anything to drill a hole through the car and you have the driver put his hand over it.
Well, it does cost a bit because, of course, all the research that goes into it, the number of different wings you need to make, it does cost something. But I sort of agree with you. Once it's there, you know, why not let it happen? Equally, the trouble with anything like this is once everyone's got it, then it becomes performance neutral, and you might say, well, actually, we don't need it anymore. I have mixed feelings on it. The important thing is to let things like that happen, because you might say, well, what good is it? But if doing something like that has made some road car designer think, well, actually, yeah, I can do something with ducted air to reduce drag, well, then it's good for everyone, isn't it?
KERS makes a return in 2011 after a year's hiatus. It was dropped on cost grounds. Why has it now come back? Because it ain't going to be any cheaper.
Yeah, I'm not sure there was an awful lot of logic in that, to be honest. Once it was there in 2009, to be honest, it should have stayed. It's a little bit easier to use now because, of course, the minimum weight limit's gone up to 640. It was 605 when we last used it. So there's a lot more leeway. And, of course, because of the introduction of the Pirelli tyres, we've even got a regulated weight distribution. So you don't have all these problems that you had with KERS of not being able to get the weight distribution, the heavier drivers suffering, all this sort of stuff. So there's a little bit more logic in it, but to be honest, I think getting rid of it last year was not sending the right messages and wasn't terribly logical.
I was sort of getting ahead of myself there and assuming too much knowledge. Just explain to people who perhaps may not grasp how it works, what is KERS, what does it do, and why do they have it?
KERS stands for Kinetic Energy Recovery System, which sounds a bit technical anyway. But basically, when a car is accelerated, it needs to use a lot of fuel to accelerate. And when you put the brakes on, you've wasted some of that energy that's in the fuel. You know, fuel is really just an energy store. A kilogram of fuel has 43 megajoules in it, for those who like numbers.
Whoa.
But, you know, what you're doing is you're using that chemical energy to accelerate the car. And unfortunately, every time you put the brakes on, you're throwing it away. You're heating the brakes up, and that's where the energy is going. What the KERS system does is it converts it into generally electricity on the systems that we've seen in Formula One. You store that in a battery. When you want to accelerate the car again, you take that out of storage and you drive an electric motor. It's what's known on road cars as hybrids, you know, cars like the Toyota Prius and things like that. And it's a technology that, you know, it's one of the many things that's going into CO2 reduction on road cars. It's not the answer, it's a step along the way, but by 2020 we'll probably see something like 4.5 million cars like that. So, you know, it's something Formula One is doing that will contribute to that.
In 15, 20 years' time, there's a possibility we may not have racing cars, or indeed road cars, powered by fossil fuel.
I think that's probably...
especially at £1.30 a litre.
Yeah, that's probably more relevant. I think 15, 20 years is far too soon, but absolutely, you know, there is a limit to fossil fuel. We need to preserve what there is. We need to use it wisely, not just because of the lack of it, but because of the CO2 issue. And the time will come when, absolutely, we'll be on fuel cells, we'll be electric vehicles, and when that happens on the road, that's what we'll race as well.
Do you think motor racing, as an extension of motor cars, has some sort of moral responsibility to do the right thing?
Yeah, absolutely, and I feel quite strongly about this. I think we do. I think it's totally wrong to be so arrogant as to say, well, we're not using much fuel, because the amount of fuel used in Formula One is nothing. But I think we have an absolute responsibility to really help the technology in CO2 reduction, and the 2013 rules in Formula One for the powertrain really go well in this direction. I think they've done a great job doing it, but I think we absolutely have a responsibility to do that. We don't want to have the fur coat syndrome. You know, we don't want people coming and saying, you shouldn't be racing. We want to anticipate that, and we want to do the right thing before the world turns against us.
Yeah, I'll let you explain what's happening in 2013 in a moment or two, but sticking with 2011, another thing we've got is the adjustable rear wing. Can you just explain how that's going to work?
Yeah, it's reasonably complex, but the basic idea is that the top element, the flap of the rear wing, can move. Now, up until the start of the race, the drivers can control it, they can move it whenever they want. And the way it moves is in a way that reduces the downforce and reduces the drag, so the car will be faster in a straight line. So during qualifying, every straight, you press the button, you reduce the drag, you go faster. Now, come the race, it's then taken out of your control a little bit. For the first 2 laps of the race, no one can use it. Thereafter, the GPS systems on the car will be sending signals to race control. And whenever a car is within 1 second of the car in front, then their flap adjustment will be enabled. So once it's enabled, the driver will know. We have a light on in the cockpit that says it's enabled. It's then up to him to press the button, reduce the drag, and overtake the car in front. Now, is that good or not? I don't know. What I'm very pleased to see is to see people being broad-minded enough to try something like this. You know, it's a good bit of lateral thinking. It's what the sport needs to do. The sport has been far too conservative in the past because we've had this situation where one team could always veto any change in the rules. With the advent of FOTA, the Formula One Teams Association, that's changed, and we're now onto a sort of majority rule. Not a simple majority, but you know, if 70% of the teams think something should happen, then it does. And it's good. Let's see how it works.
I've got visions of somebody tucked up behind somebody else going down that kilometre-long straight at Shanghai, shouting into the radio, "Put my bloody light on."
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, it's not as simple as that. I think the other thing that I worry about is the classic. If you're very close to someone on the last lap, you've got to be behind them. You don't want to be in front of them because, you know, it's almost a given that you're going to lose a position. So there's some interesting strategy. As I say, I'm not sure how... We don't want overtaking to become too easy. You know, it should be like a goal in football, not like a basket in basketball.
You don't subscribe to Max Mosley's chess game theory, do you?
Well, no, I absolutely not. It's like I was saying earlier with cricket, you know, motor racing shouldn't be an intellectual exercise. Sure, have some intellect in it, don't dumb it down too far, but don't make it so complicated that you need a PhD to just understand what the hell's going on.
How will the adjustable rear wing manifest itself at somewhere like Monaco, where you have a huge multi-element rear wing and you need maximum downforce all the time because there aren't any straights long enough to need less drag?
Well, basically, the system will be enabled there as it is anywhere else. But if you think about it, the only place that you're probably going to enable it there is up the hill out of Sandervoort or through the tunnel down to the chicane. Well, anyone who can handle reducing their downforce through there, good luck to them. They deserve to overtake, but I've a feeling they'll be swimming with the fishes before that.
Passing up the hill into Massenet isn't on, is it?
Absolutely not. You need all the road just to keep, you know, off the barriers there.
The other thing, of course, is the switch to Pirelli tyres. Bridgestone has had the monopoly for many years since Goodyear pulled out. Early signs are encouraging. Pirelli seems happy. The drivers and the teams seem happy with the sort of the flexible compounds that Pirelli appears to have produced.
Yeah, I don't think it's all over yet. You know, Pirelli have been working away sort of in private. I think they've been making good progress. And then, of course, they took the tyres to Abu Dhabi for all the teams to try. Now, the thing with any circuit, particularly one like Abu Dhabi, is it just gets faster and faster and faster as more cars run on it. And we saw when the young drivers drove on the Bridgestones a few days after the last Grand Prix, they were sort of a second and a half quicker than the established stars. So the circuit had changed a lot. And I think that when they ran the Pirellis at the weekend after the race, I think a lot of people realised that actually it was a little bit of an artificial situation, and the engineers I've spoken to said that they're still reserving judgment. Having said that, I'm absolutely confident that Pirelli will do a good job. They've got a lot to learn, but I think they've got the flexibility to do it, and I think that the FIA will allow them to learn, and I think it'll be quite a transparent change. I hope we get a little bit more variety in the tyres. That'll improve the racing.
Tyres are, no pun intended, it is a black art, isn't it? Again, it's a bit like the gimmicks, the sort of scientific gimmicks in Formula One. People are sort of amazed at the significance that tyres have. We all drive our road cars on treaded tyres. They work in the dry, they work in the wet. We don't change the tyre pressures or the compounds, we just get on with it. It's difficult to explain to somebody why tyres are so important.
Well, I mean, you talk about road tyres, you know, try when you leave the NEC, the roundabout at the top of the M42 there, try taking that at 150 and you'll find out.
Please don't do that.
But seriously, I mean, you know, the tyres, to be honest, it's not that much of a black art anymore. Years ago, absolutely, but with the advent of the big war between Bridgestone and Michelin a few years ago, really a lot more science went into it and people began to understand the tyres better and better and better. There are elements, particularly in the compounding, I think, that are still a little bit magic. But, you know, that is where the real performance is. We talk about aerodynamics because we accept that tyres are what they are. But if you could have 5% more grip from your tyres or 5% more downforce, you'd go for the grip from your tyres every time.
So those are the fundamental changes for 2011. But in 2 years' time, we have wholesale changes yet again. Just talk us through the sort of things that are going to happen.
Well, firstly, let's say we don't know they're going to happen. They're proposals at the moment. And they centre on two things. The powertrain, because we have to really call it a powertrain now rather than an engine. And then the chassis. The powertrain proposals are basically to go for a 1.6 litre four-cylinder inline turbocharged engine with a much bigger KERS on it. The chassis regulations are basically aimed at reducing downforce and drag, and fundamentally how that is occurring. Now, the powertrain regulations are quite mature. They've been discussed in a great level of detail. A lot of numbers have been put on them. They're being circulated. They're being talked about. I personally think they're very good. I think they've done an excellent job. It really sends the right message. The efficiency of the engine. I was talking about how you have that energy in your fuel, and how much you get out of the engine is really that measure of efficiency. That's something like 9% better on that engine, which is a huge amount. You know, it really is significant. Much bigger curves on the car, much better recovery. You'll be recovering heat that's wasted in the exhaust. It's a very, very efficient powertrain, and it really is a model for the future. It's the way road cars are going, and Formula One will accelerate that change. So I think they should be very proud of what they've done. My only reservation is that for a talk I was giving in Oxford earlier this week, I was talking about the engine, and I decided to do a little project plan for how you build the engine. And the only trouble is, while these regulations are still under discussion, my project plan says you should have started about 3 months ago. So I think, you know, the guys have got an awful lot to do. I hope it isn't delayed, but I fear it might be. Now, on the chassis side, what they're trying to do is really reduce the downforce and reduce the drag. They want to reduce the downforce because I think there's a feeling that Formula One cars are underpowered these days, and that's something I absolutely agree with. I think that, you know, the current 750 horsepower, which is approximately what you have on the 2013 powertrain as well, with the improvements that have been made in aerodynamics and tyres, to me that's not enough power. It's not exciting. You know, you don't see the cars really on the limit anymore. So reduce the downforce, they'll become overpowered again. That's good. Reducing the drag, again, it goes towards fuel efficiency, but to me it's a little bit artificial. You know, if you choose to drop the drag from 0.9 to 0.5, it's an arbitrary thing. Why choose that number? And I don't think the public are that naive. You know, they won't just accept that. And I guess my other reservation is that it's a wholesale change from the way things are done at the moment, where the work that was done on overtaking a little while ago did show that if you position the wings correctly, you can at least mitigate the problems of overtaking. I'm never going to say that you solve them, but you mitigate it. I think that if you go to a ground effect car, which is what the 2013 car is, there's absolutely no evidence that helps. In fact, there's some evidence to the contrary. And in producing these regulations, unfortunately, they haven't looked at overtaking, and that worries me a lot.
It's funny, we hear that people say, oh, it was better in the 70s and 80s, and actually, if you look at archive footage of races, it wasn't. Cars were strung out. Ground effect got banned because you just arrive at a corner and just go round flat out because the thing was sucked onto the road. Ground effect spoilt the racing. Why would they bring that back?
Well, firstly, you're right. You know, apart from looking at the sort of archive footage, you can actually look at the statistics, and the statistics have been produced. They're on the internet. You can look at them, and there is no doubt that it wasn't better then. It's one of these sort of golden memories.
The old rose-tinted.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, 2010 was the best year for overtaking by a long way and for a long time. There's no doubt about it. Having said that, the ground effect that we're talking about for 2013 is really quite different to that of the 70s, I guess it was, where ground effect became very, very effective. We're talking, and I guess, you know, if you did that now with skirts and things like that, the cars would be undrivable. You know, the G levels would be so high that the drivers would black out. So while we're talking about ground effect, what we mean is we're producing downforce from the underside of the car, but not with the big skirts and stuff like that. So the actual level of downforce will be quite low, as I say, less than we've got now, considerably less than we've got now.
Yeah. The thing that obviously excited me as a kid in the 70s is the cars all look different. And we're seeing a bit of that sort of coming back in IndyCar racing, certainly with this body kit option on the stock chassis. Formula One cars should all look different too, and they don't.
Yeah.
You take the stickers off,
Yep.
You'd struggle to identify which car was which.
I couldn't agree more, and this is because of the amount of prescription in the regulations, and it's a great shame, I think, that the regulations they're largely based on dimensions, and they're based on limitations of dimensions, so you always try to maximise them, and the end result is that the cars all look the same. You know, if you prescribe everything very precisely, then ultimately there's only one solution. And I think Formula One is so sophisticated these days that people are really iterating towards that single solution. It makes the cars all look the same. Open up the regulations, put a budget cap on it, so we're not having firms going out of business because they can't afford to go racing, but put the budget cap on, make it a proper budget cap, not a partial thing like they're talking of now. And
Can you police that properly, though? With the resource restriction thing, it's got a bit messy, this week.
It has, and that's because it's not being done well enough. People say, can you police it? Of course you can. Every company in this country has to produce its books to the Inland Revenue and Companies House. If you have a budget cap that actually takes the whole company, not exceptions here and exceptions there, and let's not talk about the team principal because he earns too much, that's where it goes wrong. If you follow proper accounting principles, as you have to do as any limited company in this country, of course you can do it.
Pat, I could talk to you all day, but I need to give a few other less important touring car drivers a turn on the stage. Thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please, for Pat Symonds.